February 9th, 1962, Queens, New York. The cold that morning was sharp and unforgiving. Outside St. John's Cemetery, more than 2,000 people stood in silence, their breath visible in the winter air. Every man was dressed in black. Every face was serious. This was not just a funeral. This was the gathering of power. Inside the chapel, the most influential figures of American organized crime sat shoulder to shoulder. Bosses, captains, advisors, and longtime soldiers had come from all over the country. They were there to bury one man, Charles Lucky Luciano. To the public, he was remembered as a criminal deported years earlier. But to the men in that chapel, Lucky Luciano was something else entirely. He was the man who had changed everything. The man who ended endless gang wars. The man who created structure where chaos once ruled. But beneath the quiet prayers and respectful silence, danger was everywhere. Hidden among the mourners were 12 armed men. They wore dark overcoats. Their weapons were concealed. They did not know each other's names, only their instructions. When the signal came, they would act. Their target was Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino, the most powerful mob boss in New York, was scheduled to step forward and speak. The eulogy would be his moment, a public signal that he now stood at the center of the underworld. If the plan succeeded, Gambino would die in front of 2,000 witnesses. It would be the boldest assassination in Mafia history. But the plan had a problem. Bumpy Johnson already knew. And what Bumpy Johnson did during the next 90 minutes would quietly change the balance of power between Harlem and the Italian mob forever. To understand why this mattered, you first need to understand who Lucky Luciano was. Lucky Luciano was born Salvatore Lucania in Sicily in 1917. He came to America as a child and grew up on the streets of New York. From a young age, he understood something most men never learned. Violence could win battles, but organization won empires. In the 1920s and early 1930s, New York's underworld was a mess. Rival gangs fought constantly. Power changed hands through bloodshed. Bosses ruled through fear alone. It was unstable, dangerous, and bad for business. Lucky Luciano changed that. He ended old feuds and replaced them with structure. He helped create the Mafia Commission, a council that divided territory, settled disputes, and treated crime like a business instead of a war. No single boss ruled alone. Decisions were discussed. Violence was controlled. It worked. For the first time, organized crime in America became efficient. But Lucky's success made him a target. In 1936, prosecutors convicted him on prostitution charges. He was sentenced to prison. During World War II, the U.S. government secretly made a deal with him. In exchange for helping protect New York's docks from sabotage, Lucky would be released early. He was freed. But instead of freedom, he was deported. In 1946, Lucky Luciano was sent back to Italy, never allowed to return to the United States. From exile, he watched the empire he built continue without him. He was still respected, still feared. But his days of direct control were over. On January 26, 1962, Lucky Luciano collapsed at Naples International Airport. He died of a heart attack at 64 years old. The Italian government allowed his body to be returned to America. It was a rare exception. His funeral was scheduled for February 9th in Queens. Every major figure in organized crime planned to attend, including Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino was quiet, careful, and patient. Unlike flashy bosses, he avoided attention. He believed power worked best when it stayed invisible. By 1962, he had become the most influential crime boss in New York. But not everyone accepted that. Vito Genovese certainly didn't. Genovese was once one of Lucky Luciano's top men. When Lucky went to prison, Genovese expected to rise. Instead, Lucky favored Frank Costello. For years, Genovese lived in Costello's shadow, growing more bitter with time. In 1957, Genovese helped arrange an assassination attempt on Costello. Costello survived, but stepped aside. Genovese believed he had finally won. Then came 1959. Genovese was convicted on federal drug charges and sent to prison. Many believed Carlo Gambino had quietly helped make that case possible. Now, in 1962, Genovese sat behind bars while Gambino stood ready to inherit Lucky Luciano's legacy in public. Genovese could not allow that. If he couldn't control the commission, he would destroy it. And the place to strike was Lucky Luciano's funeral. January 18, 1962. Harlem, New York. Bumpy Johnson was sitting in his office above Small's Paradise on 135th Street when one of his men walked in. "There's someone here to see you," the man said. "Italian. Says it's urgent." Bumpy nodded. "Send him in." The man who entered looked nervous, thin, early 30s. He wore a cheap coat over an expensive suit. His hands shook slightly. Bumpy recognized him immediately. Vincent "Vinny Shoes" Calabrese, a low-level soldier connected to the Genovese family. Years earlier, Vinny had been caught in a police raid with enough cash to put him away for years. Bumpy had stepped in and saved him. Vinny owed Bumpy his freedom. Now, he was here to repay that debt. "There's a hit planned," Vinny said quietly, "at Luciano's funeral." Bumpy said nothing. "Genovese gave the order from inside. 12 shooters. They'll open fire when Gambino speaks." Bumpy listened calmly. "If Gambino dies," Vinny said, "New York goes to war. Harlem will burn. I didn't want that. I owe you." Bumpy studied him for a long moment. Then he slid an envelope across the desk. "Take your family," Bumpy said. "Leave New York tonight. Don't come back for 6 months." Vinny nodded, took the envelope, and left. Bumpy Johnson sat alone. He could have warned Gambino. He could have passed the information along. But Bumpy did not warn people. He solved problems. And he had 3 weeks to do it. February 1962. Harlem moved the way it always did, but Bumpy Johnson saw it differently now. Every street, every corner, every face meant something. He knew time was limited. 3 weeks might sound like a lot, but in his world, it was nothing. Most men, after hearing about a hit like this, would have panicked. They would have called in favors, hired more guns, or warned the target and stepped back. Bumpy did none of that. He understood a simple truth. Guns solve moments, not futures. Information solves everything. Bumpy knew the shooters believed they had surprise on their side. They thought no one knew. That belief made them careless, and carelessness could be used. The first thing Bumpy did was nothing. For 2 days he made no visible moves, no unusual meetings, no extra guards. Anyone watching him would have thought he was unaware or uninterested. That was exactly what he wanted. On the 3rd day, he made his first quiet call. He reached out to Marcus "Smooth" Henderson, a man who ran a small funeral service business in Harlem. Smooth had been around Bumpy for years. He understood discretion and loyalty. "I need people placed on a job," Bumpy said. "What job?" Smooth asked. "Luciano's funeral." Smooth paused. He knew what that meant. "How many?" he asked. 8, Bumpy replied. "Drivers, ushers, helpers, men who can blend in and keep their eyes open." Smooth didn't ask why. He just said, "I'll handle it." Within a week, 8 of Bumpy's most trusted men were officially part of the funeral operation. They wore suits, they carried programs, they looked invisible, but every one of them knew exactly what to watch for. Next came misdirection. Bumpy contacted Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest who had served in Harlem for decades. During riots years earlier, Bumpy had quietly protected the church and its people. Father O'Brien never forgot that. "I need a favor," Bumpy said. "Anything," the priest replied. "I need you near the chapel entrance on the day of the funeral. If I give you a signal, I need you to cause a distraction. Nothing violent, just enough to turn heads." The priest hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "I understand." Now came the most dangerous part. Bumpy needed to know exactly where the shooters would sit. He couldn't go himself, that would raise questions. So he sent Claudette, one of the smartest women in his circle. Elegant, calm, convincing. She dressed in black, wore pearls, and walked into the funeral director's office with confidence. She told a story about being a distant relative of Lucky Luciano, worried about seating arrangements. The director, eager to please anyone connected to Luciano, showed her the seating chart. Claudette memorized it in seconds. That night, she handed Bumpy a hand-drawn map of the chapel. Every aisle, every exit, every seat, and most importantly, the exact locations reserved for Geneviese's shooters. Bumpy studied the map carefully. Now he knew where the danger was. 2 nights before the funeral, the final move was made. Late at night, when the chapel was empty, Bumpy's men switched the seat markers, quietly, carefully, no mistakes. The seats meant for the 12 shooters were reassigned to harmless mourners, elderly relatives, distant connections, people who posed no threat. The shooters would still be allowed inside. They would still think the plan was on, but they would be useless. February 9th, 1962. The morning was bitterly cold. By 9 o'clock, more than 2,000 people had gathered outside St. John's Cemetery. Reporters stood nearby. Cameras flashed. FBI agents watched from rooftops, taking notes, snapping photos. Inside the chapel, power filled the room. Carlo Gambino arrived at 9:45 a.m., surrounded by bodyguards. He wore dark sunglasses, but tension showed in his posture. He knew funerals were dangerous, too many enemies, too many grudges, but not attending Lucky Luciano's funeral was impossible. The service began at 10:15 a.m. Bumpy Johnson was not inside. He stood outside near the parking area, his fedora pulled low, watching everything. He saw them immediately. 12 men, all arriving separately, all wearing nearly identical black overcoats. They moved with purpose. They were calm, but their eyes scanned the crowd. Genovese's shooters. They entered the chapel and showed their invitations. Ushers guided them to their seats. The wrong seats. One by one, the shooters realized something was off. They were in the back rows, spread apart, too far from Gambino, surrounded by strangers. Confusion passed between them in brief glances, but they couldn't fix it. They couldn't move without drawing attention, not here, not now. Inside, Carlo Gambino stepped forward to speak. He praised Lucky Luciano as a visionary, a man who replaced chaos with order, a leader who believed in structure over bloodshed. As Gambino spoke, the shooters understood the truth. The hit was impossible. If they fired now, they would kill innocent people and be cut down instantly. The plan was dead. Outside, Bumpy Johnson watched as the service ended without violence. The shooters left separately, frustrated and terrified. They had failed, and they knew failure carried consequences. February 12, 1962. 3 days after Lucky Luciano was buried, Bumpy Johnson received a message without words. No phone call, no name, just instructions. A black Cadillac would arrive at 8 o'clock that evening on the corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. He was to be ready. Bumpy understood immediately who the message was from. At exactly 8, the Cadillac pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and nodded. No greeting, no explanation. Bumpy got in. The car moved south through Harlem, down into Manhattan. No one spoke. They crossed the bridge into Brooklyn and drove through quiet streets until they stopped in front of a small Italian restaurant. The lights were on inside, but the door was locked. The place was closed to the public. Bumpy stepped out and walked in. Carlo Gambino was sitting alone at a corner table. 2 glasses of wine were placed neatly in front of him. No bodyguards, no weapons in sight, just 2 men who understood exactly why they were there. "Mr. Johnson," Gambino said calmly, "please sit." Bumpy sat down. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Gambino leaned forward. "I know what you did," he said. Bumpy didn't answer. "I don't know how you found out," Gambino continued. "I don't know how you stopped it, but I know you did." He slid one of the glasses across the table. "You could have let me die," Gambino said. "If I was gone, my family would tear itself apart. Chaos would follow. That chaos would help you." Bumpy finally spoke. His voice was calm. "My people would pay the price," he said. Gambino nodded slowly. "Most men don't think that far ahead," he said. "You did." They drank in silence. Then Gambino spoke again. "From this moment on, Harlem is yours. My family will not move into your territory. We will not buy your people. We will not challenge your operations." Bumpy looked at him carefully. "And in return?" he asked. Gambino's eyes hardened. "You stay out of my territories, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island. And if anyone disrespects that agreement, they answer to me." Bumpy lifted his glass. "One more thing," he said. "Yes?" "If Genovese tries something like this again," Bumpy said, "you tell me first." Gambino smiled slightly, a rare expression for him. "Deal." They drank. That night, Bumpy Johnson secured something no black crime leader in New York had ever secured before. Not tolerance, not fear, respect. The 12 men who had been sent to kill Carlo Gambino did not live long. Within weeks, most of them were gone. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were found in rivers. No one asked questions. Everyone understood. Vito Genovese, still sitting in prison, realized something had gone wrong. The hit had failed. Someone had interfered. But he never learned who. He never suspected Bumpy Johnson. The idea never crossed his mind. Genovese would die in prison in 1969. Bitter, isolated, forgotten. Carlo Gambino ruled New York's underworld for another 14 years. Quietly, carefully, and he never forgot what Bumpy Johnson had done. When Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, Carlo Gambino sent a wreath to his funeral. The gesture shocked everyone who saw it. An Italian mob boss honoring a black gangster was unheard of, but those who knew the truth understood. Bumpy Johnson had not just saved Gambino's life, he had prevented a war. February 9, 1962 was supposed to end in blood. It was supposed to tear New York apart. Instead, it became a lesson. Real power is not loud. Real power does not rush. Real power sees danger before it arrives and removes it quietly. Lucky Luciano was buried that day, but the system he built survived because someone stood in the shadows and refused to let it collapse. That man was Bumpy Johnson, and his legacy was not written in gunfire, but in intelligence, patience, and control. That is how real power works.